Welcome back to Artificial Evidence. I am Owen Carver, and as always, the algorithm knows. Tonight, we are heading to the small town of Rockford, Illinois, a city just outside of Chicago, known for its blue-collar roots, quiet neighborhoods, and miles of industrial parks that once thrived, but by the late 1990s had started to fade. It was a place where people worked long shifts, kept to themselves, and looked out for their own. But on the night of November 19, 1996, something happened at the old Ridgemont manufacturing plant that would haunt Rockford for decades to come. A man named Glenn Palmer clocked in for his overnight shift at 6:58 in the evening. He was seen walking onto the factory floor at 7 o'clock. And then, sometime between his first break at 10 and his scheduled lunch at midnight, he disappeared. No one saw him leave. There were no signs of a struggle. His locker was untouched, his time card never punched out. His car was still parked in the lot, keys in the ignition, as if he had planned to return at any moment. For 27 years, Glenn Palmer's disappearance remained an open wound in Rockford. A ghost story told in break rooms and among night shift workers who still whispered about the man who walked into work one night and never came back. But the truth was far worse than anyone had imagined. This is the story of Glenn Palmer, the man who vanished during his last shift. At 34 years old, Glenn Palmer was not the kind of man who simply walked away from his life. He was quiet, reliable, and had been working at Ridgemont Manufacturing for nearly a decade. His job was straightforward, operating the sheet metal press on the factory floor. It was hard work, but it paid well enough to support his wife and their 2 young children. On the night of November 19th, he left home as he always did. He kissed his wife goodbye, grabbed his lunchbox, and drove the short distance to work, arriving just before his 7 o'clock shift. The security cameras at the employee entrance captured him entering the building. That was the last time Glenn Palmer was seen alive. When he did not return home the next morning, his wife, Danielle, knew something was wrong. Glenn was not the type to stay out late or miss a shift. She called the plant, hoping he had been asked to work overtime or had car trouble. Instead, she was met with confusion. Glenn had never clocked out. The foreman, Alan Reese, checked Glenn's locker. His belongings were still inside. His uniform, his lunchbox, everything was exactly where it should have been. The factory had security cameras, but in 1996, the system was outdated, recording in short loops that erased after 24 hours. By the time anyone realized Glenn was missing, the footage had already been taped over. At first, police believed Glenn had simply left. Maybe he had walked out, frustrated with his job or overwhelmed by stress at home. But his wife insisted otherwise. Glenn had no history of mental illness, no financial troubles, and no reason to disappear. And if he had left on his own, why was his car still in the lot? For weeks, search efforts turned up nothing. Police interviewed co-workers, but no one had seen or heard anything unusual. The factory was massive, over 200,000 square feet of machinery, storage areas, and winding hallways. A full sweep of the building revealed nothing. No signs of blood, no evidence of a struggle. Glenn Palmer had been there, and then he was not. The case went cold. For more than 2 decades, rumors swirled around Rockford. Some believed Glenn had been murdered and his body hidden somewhere in the factory. Others thought he had been kidnapped or that he had walked out on his life, despite all evidence to the contrary. Then, in the summer of 2023, everything changed. Ridgemont Manufacturing had long since shut down, the once busy factory abandoned and set for demolition. Before the wrecking crews arrived, a salvage team was sent in to remove any valuable equipment left behind. It was during this process that workers uncovered something horrifying, a hidden storage room sealed behind a welded sheet of metal. The room had not been opened in decades. Inside, covered in layers of dust and rusted machinery, was a metal barrel. When authorities arrived and opened the container, they found human remains. DNA confirmed what everyone feared. It was Glenn Palmer. His body had been sealed inside the barrel for 27 years. The autopsy revealed something even more disturbing. Glenn had not died immediately. The position of his remains suggested that he had been alive when he was placed inside, left to suffocate in the airtight container. The factory had been searched multiple times over the years, but no one had thought to check a sealed industrial barrel tucked away in an unused storage room. The discovery raised a new question. Who had put Glenn Palmer there? The answer came from an unlikely place. Old employee records from 1996 showed that one of Glenn's co-workers had been fired just weeks after his disappearance. A man named Roger Kessler. At the time, Kessler had been a supervisor on Glenn's shift. He had a history of workplace disputes and had been dismissed for violating safety protocols. He had left Rockford in the late 90s and was now living in Florida. When police interviewed him, Kessler denied any involvement. But further investigation revealed that he had been disciplined multiple times for inappropriate behavior, including an altercation with Glenn Palmer just months before the disappearance. The final piece of the puzzle came from a retired employee who, after hearing about the discovery, came forward with a memory that had haunted him for years. He recalled seeing Kessler in the factory's storage area the night Glenn disappeared. At the time, he thought nothing of it. But now, with the evidence mounting, it was clear. Kessler had lured Glenn into the storage room, knocked him unconscious, and sealed him inside the barrel, knowing no one would think to check. By the time police issued a warrant for his arrest, Roger Kessler was gone. He had fled his Florida home, disappearing just as quickly as Glenn had all those years ago. His whereabouts remain unknown. And so, even with the truth finally uncovered, justice has yet to be served. Glenn Palmer's family finally had answers, but they would never have closure. His wife, Danielle, had spent decades searching for the truth, only to find it buried in the place she had feared all along. Ridgemont Manufacturing was demolished in late 2023, its walls torn down, its secrets exposed. But even as the factory disappeared, the memory of Glenn Palmer remained, a man who clocked in for his shift and never clocked out. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Artificial Evidence. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe. I am Owen Carver, and remember, the algorithm knows.